today's story. Chapter 1. Silence Before the Storm. Dominic Hargrove wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped out of Mercy General Hospital. 16 hours on his feet in the ER had left him bone-tired, but the exhaustion felt honest. 3 years since leaving the Rangers, and he'd finally found a rhythm as a trauma nurse. The discipline, the pressure, the lives and the balance. It all made sense to him in a way civilian life rarely did. The August heat shimmered off the pavement as Dominic climbed into his pickup. He checked his phone. No messages from Lydia. Not unusual these days. 5 years of marriage, and the last 6 months had been increasingly silent. He'd chalked it up to her new job at the marketing firm. The late meetings, the weekend team-building events, the constant texts she'd hide when he entered the room. Just work stress, she'd said. And he'd believed her. Or pretended to. Dominic drove past the Thai place where they'd had their first date, automatically slowing before deciding against bringing home takeout. Again, the last 3 times, the food had sat untouched in the refrigerator until he'd thrown it away. The ranch-style house they'd purchased 2 years ago came into view. Dominic frowned. An unfamiliar black Audi was parked in his usual spot. Lydia didn't mention having company over. As he pulled into the driveway, movement caught his eye. Large black garbage bags scattered across the front lawn. A tall, muscular man with a sleeve tattoo was tossing another bag onto the pile. Beside him stood Lydia, her blonde hair pulled back, gesturing animatedly. Dominic stepped out of his truck, confusion giving way to a cold clarity as he approached. Lydia's laugh cut off abruptly when she noticed him. "You're home early," she said, crossing her arms. 16 hours is early? Dominic replied, eyeing the garbage bags. Something about their shape, the way they bulged. "What's going on?" The tattooed man smirked. There was something familiar about him, like Dominic had seen his face somewhere before. "Dominic, you remember Vince, right? From college." And then it clicked. Vincent Perry, Lydia's ex-boyfriend from before they'd met. The one she described as the one that got away during a drunken confession 3 years ago. "What's in the bags?" Dominic asked, though he already knew. Lydia's smile was brittle. "We needed your closet for Vince's things." Dominic stared at her, waiting for the punchline to what must be a cruel joke. "How long is he staying?" he finally asked. They both laughed, Vince draping his arm around Lydia's shoulders. "Permanently, of course," Vince answered, as if Dominic was slow on the uptake. Dominic stood perfectly still, the way he'd been trained to do when under fire. He'd learned in Afghanistan that movement draws attention, and attention gets you killed. His mind worked quickly, assessing, calculating. "I see," was all he said. Lydia's smile faltered. She'd expected tears, shouting, maybe even a fight. The calm on Dominic's face unsettled her. "Your stuff's all there," she gestured to the bags. "I packed everything." "That was considerate," Dominic replied. He turned back to his truck, opened the passenger door, and removed a small go bag he always kept there, another habit from his military days. Without another word, he began loading the garbage bags into the bed of his pickup. Vince and Lydia exchanged glances, confused by his lack of reaction. "That's it," Lydia called. "You're just leaving?" Dominic secured the last bag and closed the truck bed. "Yes," he said simply. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he caught Vince's reflection in the side mirror. The man was whispering something in Lydia's ear, both of them snickering. Dominic drove away quietly. By nightfall, he'd checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, his few possessions stacked neatly in the corner of the room. He sat on the edge of the bed, still in his scrubs, and made a single phone call. "Brody," he said when the line connected. "It's Dom. I need a favor." Chapter 2. The Ghost and the Shadow. The storage unit was exactly as Dominic remembered it, tucked away in an industrial district, with minimal security cameras and an owner who accepted cash without questions. 3 years ago, when he'd left the Rangers, his commanding officer had warned him, "The civilian world isn't built for men like us, Hargrove. Keep an exit strategy." So he had. Brody Maxwell leaned against his Jeep, smoking, as Dominic unlocked the padlock. The 2 men had served in the same unit for 6 years, survived 3 deployments together. While Dominic had chosen nursing, hoping to heal instead of harm, Brody had leveraged his military skills into a private security business. "Didn't think you'd ever use this place," Brody commented as the metal door rolled up with a groan. The unit contained a metal footlocker, a filing cabinet, and several waterproof containers. Dominic flicked on a flashlight and stepped inside. Neither did I. You going to tell me what happened? Dominic opened the footlocker. Inside lay specialized equipment and various identity documents. 3 different driver's licenses, passports, credit cards. He'd set everything up when he'd still been haunted by nightmares, when he'd been unsure if he could adapt to civilian life, when he'd been afraid of himself. Lydia's moved her ex-boyfriend into our house, Dominic said, his voice clinical. Threw my things on the lawn. Brody whistled low. Brother, that's cold. What do you need? I've got a spare room. Information first. Dominic pulled out a laptop, booted it up. I need to know everything about Vincent Perry. Over the next 3 days, Dominic became a ghost. He didn't show up for his shifts at the hospital. He didn't answer Lydia's increasingly frantic texts. First angry accusations, then confused questions, and finally worried pleas to let her know he was alive. He and Brody worked methodically, building a comprehensive profile of Vincent Perry. 34 years old. Former semi-professional boxer who'd never quite made it big. Multiple assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared. Currently working as a consultant for a local businessman with suspected ties to money laundering. He's bad news, Brody concluded, scrolling through financial records. How'd your wife even reconnect with this guy? Dominic stared at a surveillance photo of Vince leaving an underground casino. That's what I'd like to know. The answer came on day 4. Lydia's social media revealed she'd started a new marketing campaign for a chain of gyms. The owner? Anton Kozlov, the same businessman Vince worked for. It's not a coincidence, Dominic said, connecting the dots. Vince used his connection to Kozlov to get Lydia the contract. That's how they reconnected. What intrigued Dominic more was what he found in Kozlov's background. Russian émigré, suspected ties to organized crime, and most importantly, a reputation for eliminating problems permanently. Your wife might be in danger, Brody pointed out. If this Vince guy is using her to access your house for something related to Kozlov's operation. Dominic closed the laptop. It's not my house anymore. Brody studied his friend's face. What are you planning, Dom? I'm not sure yet, Dominic replied. But I think it's time I paid Vince a visit. Chapter 3. The Devil's Bargain. Dominic observed the house, his house, for 2 days. From a vacant property across the street, he tracked the comings and goings, noting patterns. Lydia left for work at 8:15 a.m., returning around 6:30 p.m. Vince kept irregular hours, sometimes disappearing for entire nights. On the 3rd morning of surveillance, Dominic noticed something odd. A delivery truck arrived. 2 men carried in several heavy crates. Vince supervised, signing for the delivery, then made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. Through a directional microphone, Dominic caught fragments. Secured the location. Wife doesn't suspect. Timeline moved up. 3 days max. That night, when Vince left the house at 11 p.m., Dominic followed. The man drove to an industrial warehouse where he met with Kozlov and 3 other men. They spent 2 hours inside, then dispersed. But instead of returning home, Vince drove to a strip club on the edge of town. Dominic waited in the parking lot. At 3 a.m., Vince emerged, clearly intoxicated, with a woman on each arm. He dismissed them when they asked for payment, shoving one hard enough that she stumbled. As they cursed at him, Vince staggered to his car. Perfect timing. Need a ride? Dominic asked, stepping out of the shadows. Vince squinted, recognition slowly dawning. You're the husband, he slurred. The nurse boy. Pararescue specialist, actually, Dominic corrected. 12 years in the Rangers before nursing. Vince snorted. Whatever. The fuck you want? To talk. Dominic nodded to a 24-hour diner across the street. Coffee might help sober you up. Curiosity overcame caution, aided by alcohol. Vince followed Dominic to the diner, where they took a booth in the back. The overnight waitress brought 2 coffees and retreated, sensing the tension. I found my clothes in garbage bags on the lawn after working a double shift, Dominic said conversationally. My wife texted, we needed your closet for my ex-boyfriend's things. When I asked how long he was staying, they both laughed. Permanently, of course. Vince smirked. You should have seen your face, man. I left quietly, Dominic continued. But I've been watching, and I know Kozlov has you storing something in my house. Something that's moving in 3 days. The smirk vanished. Vince's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. Weapons? Drugs? Whatever it is, Lydia's fingerprints are all over it now. When the feds come knocking, and they will, she goes down with you. There won't be any feds, Vince growled. Dominic leaned forward. Unless someone tips them off. A tense silence stretched between them. What do you want? Vince finally asked. I want you to understand something, Dominic said, voice dropping. I survived 3 tours in places where death came from clear skies. I've killed men who never saw me coming. And I was very, very good at my job. He slid a phone across the table. This has evidence of everything you and Kozlov are planning. In 3 days, it automatically uploads to federal servers unless I enter a code. Vince's face darkened. You think I won't find where you're hiding? That we won't shut you up permanently? Dominic smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. I'm counting on you to try. He stood up, tossed cash on the table. 3 days, Vince. Choose wisely. As Dominic walked away, Vince called after him. Your wife never loved you. She was always waiting for me to come back. Dominic didn't turn around. The trap was set. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Dark. Brody's expression was grim as Dominic explained his encounter with Vince. You basically painted a target on your back, he said. Kozlov isn't someone to mess with. They sat in a secure apartment Brody kept for clients who needed to disappear temporarily. The walls were soundproofed, the windows bulletproof, and a complex security system monitored all approaches. I'm counting on Vince to panic, Dominic replied. He'll go to Kozlov. He'll want me eliminated before their operation concludes. And that helps you how exactly? Dominic unfolded a map of the city. Because while they're hunting me, I'll be preparing the real trap. Over the next 24 hours, Dominic's prediction played out with clockwork precision. Through Brody's network of contacts, they learned that Kozlov had indeed put out feelers, seeking information on Dominic's whereabouts. 2 men had been spotted watching the hospital where Dominic worked. Meanwhile, Dominic called in favors from people he'd helped during his nursing career. A pharmacy technician who owed him for covering up a dispensing error provided certain medications. A former patient who'd beaten an opioid addiction after Dominic's intervention offered his skills as a locksmith. You never told me why they chose your house, Brody commented as they assembled equipment. Seems like a huge risk for whatever they're planning. Dominic paused. It's the location. Our house backs up to the state forest. There's a service road half a mile through the woods that connects to the interstate. Perfect for moving something without being seen. What about Lydia? You think she's involved willingly? The question hung in the air. Despite everything, Dominic had been avoiding this particular line of thought. I don't know, he finally admitted. But I'm going to find out. That night, while Vince was meeting with Kozlov, Dominic slipped back into his former home through a basement window he'd deliberately left with a faulty lock years ago. Another military habit, always having a back door. The house felt different. Vince's possessions lay scattered throughout. His clothing hung in Dominic's closet. His toiletries cluttered the bathroom counter. Photos of Dominic had been removed, replaced with new ones of Lydia and Vince. In the guest bedroom, Dominic found what he was looking for, the crates. Using specialized tools, he opened one without breaking the seal. Inside were tightly wrapped packages that he immediately recognized as high-grade heroin. Millions of dollars worth. As he carefully reclosed the crate, he heard the front door open. Quickly, he moved to the bedroom closet, sliding behind hanging clothes. Lydia entered alone, dropping her purse on the bed with a weary sigh. She paced the room, then pulled out her phone and dialed. Mom, it's me, she said, her voice strained. No, he still hasn't contacted anyone. I know it's been a week. Of course I feel terrible. She paused, listening. You don't understand. Vince said it was just temporary, that we needed a secure location for some merchandise. No, I didn't know what it was at first. By the time I realized, I was already in too deep. Another pause. I can't go to the police. Vince made it clear what would happen. Her voice broke. I never wanted to hurt Dominic. He deserved better than this. After she hung up, Lydia sank onto the bed, buried her face in her hands, and wept. Dominic remained motionless in the closet, listening to his wife's unfiltered grief, reconciling it with the woman who had laughed as his possessions were thrown onto the lawn. When she finally left the room, Dominic slipped out the way he had come, carrying with him a small sample from one of the packages and something else, a single strand of Lydia's hair from her brush. You got what you needed? Brody asked when he returned. More than I expected, Dominic replied, his expression unreadable. Chapter 5. The Ties That Bind. Vincent Perry had never been a patient man. The waiting was killing him, cooped up in Dominic's house with Lydia's increasingly nervous presence. 3 days, the ex-husband had said. It had been 2, and despite Kozlov's men searching everywhere, Dominic Hargrove had vanished like smoke. He's bluffing, Vince told himself as he paced the living room. There's no evidence. No phone. Nothing to upload. But doubt not at him. He'd underestimated Dominic from the beginning, dismissing him as a soft civilian. The cold, calculating look in the man's eyes at the diner told a different story. This wasn't just some heartbroken husband. This was a trained operator who'd gone ghost at the first sign of trouble. Lydia entered the living room, arms wrapped protectively around herself. Vince, we need to talk about what happens after everything's done. Not now, he snapped. I've got bigger problems. Like my husband? She asked quietly. Vince rounded on her. Your husband is nothing. A nobody who got lucky in the military and came back to play nurse. Then why are you so scared of him? The slap was reflexive, hard enough to knock Lydia back a step. She touched her reddening cheek, eyes wide with shock. I'm not scared, Vince hissed. I'm cautious. There's a difference. His phone rang. Kozlov. Vince stepped outside to take the call, leaving Lydia staring after him, something hardening in her expression. Meanwhile, Dominic and Brody were executing the next phase of their plan. They'd identified Kozlov's 2 main lieutenants, Sebastian Reeves, a former intelligence contractor with a taste for expensive whiskey, and Mikhail Petrov, Kozlov's nephew and heir apparent. Divide and conquer, Dominic explained as they watched Sebastian enter his favorite bar. The organization fractures when the leadership can't trust each other. Inside, Brody took a seat next to Sebastian at the bar, ordered the same whiskey, and struck up a conversation about rare spirits. 20 minutes later, when Sebastian excused himself to use the restroom, Brody slipped something into his drink. The next morning, Sebastian woke in a motel room with no memory of how he'd gotten there. Only a burner phone on the nightstand with a single text. Insurance files sent to Kozlov. Need to meet. Your office. Noon. Simultaneously, Mikhail received an anonymous package containing surveillance photos of Sebastian meeting with a known FBI informant, along with bank statements showing large deposits to an offshore account. By noon, Kozlov's organization was in chaos. Sebastian and Mikhail were accusing each other of betrayal, while Kozlov struggled to maintain order. The weapons shipment, the one that was supposed to accompany the drugs in 3 days, was postponed indefinitely. They're scrambling, Brody reported after speaking with his contacts. Kozlov's pulled men off the search for you to deal with the internal threat. Dominic nodded. Perfect. Now we need the final piece. He pulled out a burner phone and made a call to a number he'd memorized years ago. Major Colton? It's Hargrove. I need to call on that favor you owe me. The next day, Special Agent Dana Webster of the DEA received an anonymous tip about a major drug shipment, complete with detailed information about the location, quantity, and players involved. What interested her most was the tipster's claim that a rogue soldier was planning to intercept the shipment for himself. We have a potential bloodbath brewing, she told her team. We move tomorrow night. As evening fell, Dominic prepared the last elements of his plan. In a secure location, he laid out several syringes filled with a carefully measured compound. What exactly is that? Brody asked, eyeing the syringes warily. A cocktail, Dominic replied. Scopolamine, ketamine, and a few other things. Untraceable in standard tox screens, breaks down quickly in the body. Jesus, Dom, are you sure about this? Dominic's eyes were cold as he packed the syringes in a specialized case. Vince made his choice when he moved into my house. Lydia made hers when she put my things on the lawn. And what about your choice? Brody pressed. This crosses a line. I crossed that line years ago in places you've never been, Dominic replied quietly. The difference is, this time I'm choosing who deserves it. Chapter 6. The Hour of the Wolf. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dominic sat alone in Brody's secure apartment, methodically cleaning a set of surgical tools. He'd always had steady hands. It's what made him an excellent medic in the field and later a sought-after trauma nurse. Those same hands now prepared instruments not for healing, but for something else entirely. His phone buzzed with a text from Brody. Package delivered. The package was a carefully crafted piece of misinformation, delivered anonymously to Kozlov, suggesting that Dominic planned to steal the drug shipment that night. It was the final push designed to force their hand. Across town, Vince paced nervously in Dominic's former home office, which he'd converted to a makeshift command center. Maps of the area were spread across the desk, along with 3 burner phones and a handgun. Kozlov wants us to move the shipment tonight, he told Lydia, who stood in the doorway. All of it. His contact at the DEA says there might be a raid coming. Tonight. Lydia's face paled. But you said we had 3 days. Plans change. Vince checked his watch. The trucks arrive at midnight. We load everything and it's gone by 1 a.m. Then we're in the clear. And Dominic? She asked quietly. Vince's expression darkened. Kozlov's men found a lead on where he's hiding. They're handling it. Lydia closed her eyes briefly. Will they kill him? Does it matter? He's nothing to you now. Vince grabbed her arm. You're with me, remember? We're building something here. She pulled away. Building what exactly? A life running drugs for Kozlov? Is that what you promised when you came back? Don't get self-righteous now, Vince sneered. You knew what this was when you let me move in. I knew you needed a place to store some merchandise. I didn't know it was millions in heroin. I didn't know Dominic would be in danger. Vince laughed harshly. Your husband's a big boy. He made his choice when he threatened me. Outside the house, concealed in the growing dusk, Dominic listened to the argument through a directional microphone. His suspicions about Lydia's involvement were being confirmed in real time. Not entirely innocent, but not fully complicit either. Manipulated, certainly. Used, definitely. Not that it changed anything. As darkness fell completely, Dominic moved. While Vince was occupied with preparations in the basement, Dominic re-entered the house through his secret access point. He made his way silently to the kitchen, where he carefully injected a clear liquid into an open bottle of bourbon Vince had left on the counter. The man's habit of drinking from the bottle, now a fatal vulnerability. Then, just as silently, Dominic retreated to the woods behind the property. There, he'd prepared a blind, a concealed observation post with a clear view of the house and the service road beyond. From a specialized container, he removed a high-powered rifle with a thermal scope, assembled it with practiced hands, and settled in to wait. At 10:30 p.m., 2 SUVs pulled up to the house. 6 men emerged, Kozlov's security team, there to oversee the transfer. They entered the house, where Vince greeted them tensely. Through Dominic's scope, he could see Lydia being instructed to stay upstairs. At 11:15 p.m., Vince, clearly agitated, took a long pull directly from the bourbon bottle. At 11:30 p.m., he began showing signs of disorientation, touching his head, leaning against furniture for support. At 11:45 p.m., Vince staggered upstairs, waving off concern from Kozlov's men, claiming he needed to lie down for a few minutes. Dominic watched through his scope as Vince entered the master bedroom, where Lydia appeared startled by his condition. Words were exchanged, heated ones, judging by their body language. Then Vince collapsed onto the bed, his movements uncoordinated, while Lydia backed away toward the door. Perfect timing. Dominic reached for his phone and sent a pre-composed text to the DEA's Agent Webster. Operation in progress. Hargrove House. Shipment moving tonight. Then he sent a second text to Brody. Phase 1 complete. Commence Phase 2. Across town, Brody made a call to a number he'd been given. The voice that answered was gruff, professional. Major Colton. Sir, this is Maxwell. Hargrove says it's time. There was a pause. Understood. Assets are in position. As midnight approached, 3 unmarked vans turned onto the road leading to Dominic's house, their lights off, moving with precision. Simultaneously, DEA vehicles took up positions at strategic points near the property, agents prepared for a raid but holding position on Webster's command. Inside the house, oblivious to the encirclement, Kozlov's men continued preparations for the shipment transfer. In the master bedroom, Vince lay immobile, barely conscious, with Lydia watching him from the doorway, conflict evident on her face. And in his blind in the woods, Dominic Hargrove waited for the perfect moment to spring the trap that would destroy everything Vince and Kozlov had built and change his own life forever. Chapter 7. The Devil's Hour. At precisely midnight, 3 delivery trucks pulled onto the service road behind Dominic's house. Through his scope, Dominic watched as Kozlov's men moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a security perimeter before signaling the trucks to approach the house. In the master bedroom, Vince lay motionless on the bed, his breathing shallow, eyes unfocused. The compound Dominic had created was working exactly as designed, paralyzing but not lethal, at least not yet. Lydia paced the room, repeatedly checking her phone, torn between fear and self-preservation. Dominic pressed the transmit button on his radio. Bravo team status? In position, came Major Colton's clipped response. 12 men, all with NVGs, awaiting your signal. Hold for Phase 2, Dominic replied. Below, Kozlov's men had begun moving the crates from the house to the first truck. The operation was smooth, professional. These weren't street-level dealers. They were experienced smugglers who had done this many times before. Dominic adjusted his position slightly and focused on the lead truck. Through his scope, he could make out the driver, none other than Mikhail Petrov, Kozlov's nephew. The fact that he was personally overseeing the transport spoke volumes about the shipment's importance. Perfect. Dominic picked up his phone and made a call to Agent Webster. The shipment is moving now, he said when she answered. 3 trucks, heading east on the service road toward Interstate 40. Armed escort, at least 6 men. Who is this? Webster demanded. How did you? The information I provided was accurate. Dominic cut her off. Now I'm giving you the window to make your move. 5 minutes, then they're gone. He ended the call and immediately radioed Major Colton. Execute Phase 2. Countdown starts now. What happened next was a precisely orchestrated symphony of chaos. First, 2 small explosive charges detonated on the service road, far enough from the house to not cause injury, but close enough to block the truck's escape route. Next, Major Colton's team, all former Special Forces operators, emerged from the woods on the opposite side, creating the impression of a pincer movement. They fired over the heads of Kozlov's men, driving them back toward the house. Simultaneously, DEA agents responded to what they believed was an imminent escape, accelerating their raid timeline. They approached from the front of the house, announcing their presence with sirens and floodlights. Caught between what they perceived as 2 separate forces, Kozlov's men made the predictable choice. They retreated into the house with the drugs, prepared to defend their shipment. Inside, Lydia heard the commotion and rushed to the window, panic evident on her face as she saw the lights and heard the shouting. She grabbed her phone, dialing frantically. Dominic watched it all unfold through his scope, timing his next move carefully. When the last of Kozlov's men had retreated into the house, he pressed his radio again. Phase 3. I'm moving in. Using the confusion as cover, Dominic approached the house from a blind spot he'd identified earlier, a section of the property not visible from either the front approach or the service road. He entered through the same basement access point he'd used before, moving silently up the stairs into the main house. The interior was chaos. Kozlov's men had taken defensive positions, some facing the front where DEA agents were shouting commands to surrender, others watching the back where they believed another threat existed. None of them noticed Dominic as he slipped into the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He found Lydia in the master bedroom, still on her phone, her back to the door. Vince remained on the bed, conscious but immobile, eyes widening in recognition and fear as Dominic entered. They're surrounding the house, Lydia was saying into her phone, her voice strained. Vince is sick or drugged or something. I don't know what to. She turned and froze, the phone slipping from her fingers as she saw Dominic. Hello, Lydia, he said calmly. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. From below came the sound of breaking glass and shouted commands as the DEA began their entry. Not much time, Dominic continued, stepping further into the room. He glanced at Vince. I see you've been taking care of my replacement. Dom, Lydia finally managed. What did you do? I created a scenario, he replied, as if discussing something mundane like the weather. Kozlov believes his operation was betrayed from within. The DEA believes they're stopping a major drug shipment. And you too. He looked between Lydia and the paralyzed Vince. You're caught in the middle. You set us up, she whispered. No different than what you did to me. Dominic moved to the bed, looking down at Vince, whose eyes blazed with helpless rage. Though I was more efficient about it. Shouts and the sound of a struggle echoed from downstairs. They didn't have much time. The DEA will be here any moment, Dominic said. They'll find Kozlov's drugs, Vince's fingerprints all over everything. And you, Lydia, the homeowner who let it all happen. I didn't know, she protested, tears forming. I swear, I didn't know what he was really doing until it was too late. Maybe, Dominic acknowledged. But that's between you and the federal prosecutors now. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a syringe. What is that? Lydia asked, backing away. Insurance, Dominic replied. The compound already in Vince's system will be undetectable in an autopsy. He held up the syringe. This will cause his system to shut down completely. By the time they find him, it will look like a heart attack brought on by stress. You're going to kill him? Lydia's voice rose in panic. Dominic, you can't. Can't I? His voice was deadly quiet. He took my home, my wife, my life. And for what? To use as a way station for his drug operation? To feel like he'd won some game I didn't even know we were playing. Vince made a strangled sound, trying desperately to move, to speak, but the paralytic held him firmly. Footsteps pounded on the stairs. The DEA was working their way through the house, room by room. Dominic looked at Lydia, really looked at her, searching for the woman he'd married. All he saw was fear and self-interest. Make your choice, Lydia, he said, holding out the syringe. You can inject him yourself and tell the DEA you found him like this when they broke in. Or you can let him live, and when he recovers, he'll tell them everything about your involvement. She stared at the syringe, conflict etched on her face. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered. I'm not doing anything, Dominic replied coldly. I'm giving you the choice I never had. The footsteps were at the end of the hallway now. Lydia's hand trembled as she reached for the syringe. Chapter 8. Ashes and Dust. 3 days later, Vincent Perry was found dead in the guest bedroom of what had once been Dominic and Lydia Hargrove's home. The official cause, cardiac arrest, likely brought on by the stress of the DEA raid and his subsequent arrest. Despite the best efforts of prison medical staff, he couldn't be resuscitated. The same day, in an interview room at the federal building downtown, Lydia Hargrove sat across from Agent Webster, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights in custody. Let me understand this, Webster said, reviewing her notes. You claim you had no knowledge that the crates contained heroin? That you believed they were legitimate merchandise for Mr. Perry's business? Yes, Lydia insisted. Vince told me they were specialized exercise equipment. Prototypes. That's why they needed to be stored somewhere secure. And you never looked inside these crates? Never questioned why they required armed guards to transport. Lydia's gaze dropped to the table. I started to suspect something was wrong, but by then, I was afraid of what Vince might do if I asked too many questions. Webster's expression remained skeptical. The DA's office is prepared to charge you as an accessory. The penalties for trafficking this quantity of heroin are severe, Mrs. Hargrove. I've told you everything I know, Lydia said desperately. What else can I do? Cooperation might help your case, Webster allowed. But we need more than just Vincent Perry. We need Kozlov. Lydia's phone had started ringing incessantly moments after news of Vince's death broke. 87 missed calls from a blocked number before the DEA had taken her phone as evidence. She knew who it was, knew what he wanted. If I help you with Kozlov, she said carefully, what kind of deal could I get? Meanwhile, across town, Dominic sat in a different interview room with 2 military investigators from the Criminal Investigation Division. His hands were folded calmly on the table as the investigators reviewed their file. Major Colton confirms your account, the lead investigator said. He states that you contacted him with information about a drug operation being run by a Russian national named Anton Kozlov. That's correct, Dominic replied. And you learned about this operation how? Through my wife, Dominic explained. When I found my clothes in garbage bags on the lawn after working a double shift, my wife texted, "We needed your closet for my ex-boyfriend's things." When I asked how long he was staying, they both laughed. Permanently, of course. He paused, allowing the brutality of the moment to sink in. I left quietly, he continued. 3 days later, I learned that Vince, the ex-boyfriend, was using my house to store drugs for Kozlov. I reported what I knew to Major Colton, who agreed to assist in the operation. The second investigator leaned forward. The problem, Mr. Hargrove, is the timing. You reported this to Major Colton after you had already confronted Vincent Perry at a diner, threatening to expose his operation. Dominic's expression remained impassive. I needed confirmation before involving the military. The confrontation was a calculated risk to gather more information. And your wife's involvement? I believe she was manipulated, Dominic said carefully. Whether she was fully aware of what was happening in our house is for the courts to decide. The investigators exchanged glances. Mr. Hargrove, were you present at the house during the DA raid? A moment of silence stretched between them. No, Dominic replied evenly. I was at Brody Maxwell's apartment. He can confirm my whereabouts. The lead investigator closed his file. For now, we're concluding our investigation into your involvement. The DEA has primary jurisdiction over the drug trafficking case. As Dominic was escorted out, he passed the room where Lydia was still being interviewed. Their eyes met briefly through the glass. Hers pleading, his unreadable. That evening, in Brody's apartment, Dominic watched the local news report on Vincent Perry's death in custody. Heart failure, Brody commented, taking a swig of beer. Convenient. Dominic said nothing, his attention fixed on the screen as it showed footage of Anton Kozlov being led away in handcuffs, the result of Lydia's cooperation. You never told me what really happened in that bedroom, Brody said carefully. With Lydia and Vince. Dominic turned from the television. Does it matter? I guess not, Brody conceded. But Lydia's calls, 87 of them before the feds took her phone. She's trying to reach you. Let her try, Dominic replied coldly. She might take a deal. Testify against Kozlov for reduced charges. She could be out in a few years. Dominic stood, moved to the window. The city lights spread before him like a field of stars, each one representing lives entangled in their own dramas of love, betrayal, and consequences. It doesn't change anything, he said finally. What was broken can't be repaired. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Hargrove, this is Agent Webster. We need to speak. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Brody read the message over his shoulder. What do you think she wants? Dominic pocketed the phone. Closure. Something few of us ever really get. Chapter 9. What Remains. 1 year later. The small cabin in the Montana wilderness was exactly what Dominic had been looking for. Remote, self-sufficient, with a view of mountains that reminded him of Afghanistan, though without the constant threat of violence. Here, the silence was broken only by wind through pines and the occasional cry of an eagle. He sat on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. A year since the Kozlov case had wrapped up. A year since he'd walked away from his old life entirely. Kozlov had received 30 years in federal prison after Lydia's testimony helped dismantle his entire operation. Lydia herself had been sentenced to 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. A generous deal considering the evidence against her. Dominic had never visited her, had never responded to her letters, which arrived with steadfast regularity despite his silence. They sat in a box in his cabin, unopened but not discarded, a testament to something he couldn't quite name. The crunch of tires on gravel announced a visitor, unusual for a place so deliberately isolated. Dominic set down his coffee and watched as a government SUV wound its way up the dirt road. Agent Webster. He'd been expecting her, though not quite this soon. She stepped out of the vehicle, looking out of place in her crisp suit against the rugged landscape. Beautiful spot, she commented as she approached the porch. Though a long way from civilization. That's the point, Dominic replied, gesturing to a second chair. Coffee. She nodded, taking the seat while Dominic went inside to pour her a cup. When he returned, she was surveying the valley below. I could get used to this view, she admitted, accepting the coffee. But you won't, Dominic said. You're here on business. Webster sipped her coffee, considering him over the rim. Kozlov's organization has been dismantled, his assets seized, his associates prosecuted. A complete success by any measure. And yet you're here, Dominic observed. She set down her mug. Vincent Perry's autopsy has been reviewed. The initial finding of natural causes has been questioned. Dominic's expression remained calm. By whom? By me, Webster replied. There were inconsistencies. Subtle ones. Nothing that would stand up in court, but enough to make me curious. About what really happened in that bedroom during the raid. She fixed him with a penetrating stare. About whether Lydia Hargrove is serving time for more than just drug trafficking. Dominic held her gaze. Are you here to arrest me, Agent Webster? No, she said after a moment. I'm here to close a file. To satisfy my own curiosity. And if you don't like the answers? Webster looked out at the mountains again. Sometimes justice and the law don't perfectly align. Vincent Perry was a violent criminal who destroyed lives for profit. If his death wasn't entirely natural. She shrugged. I can live with the ambiguity. Dominic studied her, recognizing something in her pragmatism that echoed his military experience, the understanding that the world rarely offered clean moral choices. The official record stands, he said finally. Anything else is speculation. Webster nodded slowly. Fair enough. She reached into her jacket and withdrew an envelope. Your ex-wife is being released next month. Good behavior, cooperation, the usual factors. She asked me to give you this. Dominic made no move to take the envelope. She's dying, Webster added quietly. Cancer. Advanced stage. The Bureau arranged compassionate release. The news landed like a physical blow, unexpected in its impact. Dominic had imagined many futures, many possible endings to their story, but not this. Reluctantly, he took the envelope. Thank you for the coffee, Webster said, standing. And for your service, both military and otherwise. After she'd gone, Dominic sat for a long time with the unopened envelope, turning it over in his hands as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Finally, he tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, Lydia and Dominic on their wedding day, laughing, unaware of the camera. On the back, in Lydia's handwriting, I made my choice that night. I chose wrong. I'm sorry. No plea for forgiveness. No request to visit. Just an acknowledgement of the truth they both knew. Dominic returned to the cabin and placed the photograph in the box with the unopened letters. Then he packed a small bag with essential supplies and locked the cabin door behind him. The mountains called, as they always did when his mind needed clearing. He would hike to the ridge, make camp, and watch the stars appear one by one in a sky untainted by city lights. In that vastness, he would contemplate what remained after revenge had burned itself out. Not forgiveness, certainly, but perhaps something like peace. As he shouldered his pack and set off on the familiar trail, Dominic thought about choices, those made in moments of crisis, those made in cold calculation, and those yet to come. He thought about Lydia, dying in a hospital somewhere, carrying the weight of her decisions to the end. He thought about Vince, whose arrogance had cost him everything. And he thought about himself, a man who had walked away from bloodshed only to create his own version of justice when the world demanded it. The path steepened, his breathing deepened, and behind him, the cabin grew smaller with distance. Ahead lay the wilderness, indifferent to human dramas, offering neither judgment nor absolution, only the next step forward and the one after that. Dominic Hargrove kept walking. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.